So the Verge Mobile Show is kind of like an iPhone launch. You wait for it, you wait for it, you're so excited, and then it finally comes. And it's pretty much what you expected. But, maybe that's not so bad because it's also everything that you hoped for. Stay tuned for the Verge Mobile Show. Hi, I'm Dieter Bohn.
I'm Dan Seifert.
I'm Chris Sigler.
And this is episode 17 for the week of September 17th, 2012 of the Verge Mobile Show. It's our golden Verge Mobile Show.
Golden?
Yeah, what makes it golden?
Isn't that like your golden birthday is like when the birthday falls on the day of your age?
I thought golden would be
Isn't
like
that
the
a thing?
50th show or something.
I think
it's like your
gold is
golden
like
birthday.
the 30th. The 50th is diamond
Man.
and platinum.
I'm looking it
Guys.
up now. Hold on. Wait, everybody hang on. Yeah, no, 50 is golden. 50 is golden.
Okay.
There's a pony
This
boy
is
joke
hold
here,
on.
but I'm
Wait,
not going to
wait.
reach for
This
it.
is our crystal. No, our 15th show was our crystal show, and our 20th show will be our China show.
Nice.
Yep,
Wow.
25th will be our silver show. Anyway,
So if you notice, Vlad Savov is not with us today,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
he is at Photokina taking amazing pictures of cameras that also take amazing pictures.
Yes.
It's very meta at Photokina.
Very, very jealous, to be honest with you. I am.
They've actually done a really excellent. If you haven't seen the coverage, there's a stream explaining all the stuff that's happened at Photokina, and I'm not a camera nerd, but they've done a really good job of making all this camera news accessible and understandable. So like I can actually read through the stream, read our stories, and not feel like I'm an idiot, which is what most camera coverage makes me feel like. Like when I go
So
to DP
can-
review, it just makes me feel dumb.
can I just say that I am in the process of eBaying both my kidneys and selling a large amount of cocaine for a Leica M. I will do a wide variety of illegal things for a Leica M. I had the opportunity to use an M9 for a couple weeks a couple years ago, and was just like it's a really hard thing to explain in specs because it doesn't compare very favorably to anything. But there's something about the experience of using a Leica that is just extremely appealing, and it is hard to describe. You just got to use it, and then you understand why people pay upwards of $10,000 or $15,000 for Leica bodies and lenses.
Indeed.
I'm not
That
going
has
to.
nothing to do with phones, though. So
So here's the thing. There was a big iPhone event last week, and it's dominated the mobile news. And we're going to talk about the iPhone for, I think it's fair to say, a very long time. We have a lot of thoughts and feelings and things to say about the iPhone. There's a lot of details to dig into and just a lot of stuff to say. And so if you're here looking for us to talk about the fact that there's an orange version of the Lumia 820, but not of the 920, and how angry that makes me, that rant is going to have to wait until next week.
is that a direct shot at me, Dieter? Because that felt like you were aiming that at me.
No, they're making an orange version of the 820, but not of the 920, and it drives me crazy. I guess we should also mention that like Nokia showed. We got to get into the iPhone stuff anyway. That Nokia showed like literally a quarter of a second blip of a cyan Lumia 920.
It was one
in their
frame, I
promo
think.
video.
Yeah.
It was one frame. Yeah. Like
So I
they're
have a theory about this.
All right.
I'm sorry to derail the conversation already, but actually it's not my theory. This was going around on Twitter. Apparently a previous version of the video that had been uploaded by Nokia showed more of that cyan phone. And so I think what happened was they realized their mistake and attempted to trim it out and missed that one frame.
How do you miss a
and
frame
so-
in the middle of a shot? That's ridiculous.
I don't know. Who knows what sort of weird editing tools they're using, but I think that's what happened.
I love that we're not going to talk about anything but the iPhone, and we immediately start talking about the Lumia.
I would
the way it is.
personally be game. I would be totally fine with a 90-minute show about Nokia phone colors. I could do that every week ad nauseum. But
So
anyway,
the real
we should
question is,
probably talk.
what color phone would Paul Walker use if he had a Lumia phone?
Oh, that is a supernova of all my favorite things. I'm literally about to pass out just thinking about this topic. Let's talk iPhone,
right,
please. I'm dying.
Let's first things last. Did you guys pre-order?
I did.
I did not.
What? Really?
This blew my mind when Chris told me that he did not. But.
This is what happens. I was telling Dan this I think last week. What I do, and this happens every single year, and has since the second iPhone, the iPhone 3G. What happens to me is I swear up and down that I'm not going to get an iPhone. I don't pre-order, and then the morning of the event comes, and I wake up like at 4 a.m. and I'm like, shucks, I'm gonna go get in line, and then I go get in line and I buy one. Happened with the 4S, happened with the 4. It's gonna happen again with the 5S. So we'll see what happens on Friday, but there's a very real chance that I will be standing in line at 4 a.m.
Well, so with the 4S, I rolled in 4S and the iPad 3, sorry, the new iPad. I rolled into an AT&T store for the 4S and a Verizon store for the iPad at like 11 o'clock in the morning, just like waltzed in, 0 line, bought the phone and the iPad and waltzed out, no problem.
Wow.
I kind of think that that's going to happen this time around. I don't think that there'll be no lines at the carrier stores. I think it's a bigger. I mean, we know it's they've pre-sold twice as many as the story.
Yeah.
They broke all of their sales records.
Well, yeah, and this time around, you've got all the people with the iPhone 4 coming off contract or have been off contract waiting for the 5, where you didn't have quite as many for the 4S. So I have a feeling there's going to be some selling out and some lines.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I pre-ordered 32 gig black on AT&T. I think the black one looks
Copying
great.
my style.
Hey, man, I think that the fact that they painted or they brushed over, they darkened the metal rail around it, I think it looks awesome.
Yeah.
I'm actually super excited for this hardware, which I didn't think I would be, but I really am. I think it looks great. I think we'll see how I feel about the larger screen. You know, I've been using a 1X or a Galaxy S3 and a Galaxy Nexus and all these other big screen phones for so long that I think it's going to actually feel a little bit cramped. But, I think having a super thin phone and a reliable LTE phone, I'm actually pretty excited about that. I'm pretty excited about being able to tether off of this thing because tethering off of Android works for the most part, but USB tethering especially seems to be hit or miss, especially after Android 4.0. They changed their driver model a little bit. And so it's often the case that like I'll plug in an Android phone and it won't show up as a USB modem on my Mac, and it's a big hassle. And the iPhone 5, I'm excited to go back to like totally reliable USB tethering.
Yeah. I feel pretty strongly, going back to your color selection, Dieter and Dan, I feel pretty strongly that with this generation, white and black have flip-flopped, and black is like the chic color,
definitely.
and white is like the standard, like normal color. Do you guys agree?
I totally agree. The last generation, I was all about the white model. I think the white model looks great. It's the one I owned, and et cetera. But I usually go for the white phone. But this time around, just that, I hate to use the murdered out phrase, but that black really just kind of like grabbed me, and that matte finish, and I don't know. I went black.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, let's stick with like talking about hardware specs here. Of course, we know about the larger display. We know about LTE and LTE bands. Like this is actually interesting. So with the 4S, they had basically a single model with single radio set up for CDMA and GSM, and it was basically the same thing worldwide. With this one, there's how many different? Because the Verizon and the AT&T are different, and the Sprint one also, I don't know how that ties in.
I believe there are 3 models in total.
So there's three.
Right.
There's 3 SKUs, but I'm of the feeling, and I know a lot of other people in the industry are as well, that there's really only 2 models, and the extra SKU is just kind of like with certain things disabled and certain things enabled on the same hardware as the other models. So you've got your AT&T LTE model, which is the A1428, I believe, and so that supports your standard HSPA plus on all of AT&T's bands, standard GSM, of course, and then it supports AT&T's LTE bands, and that model will be sold in Canada. It works on the Canadian LTE carriers. And then after that, you've got the A1429 CDMA version, which is going to be offered by Verizon and Sprint. And that has compatible LTE bands for both Verizon and Sprint, as well as your necessary CDMA band support. And it also has HSPA plus support on the same bands as the AT&T model. So you can use it globally, just like you could with the 4S. And then the third model is the A1429 GSM model, which has all the same things, except it doesn't have all the same things as the Verizon and Sprint model, but it doesn't have the CDMA support, which I feel is just turned off because the LTE band support is pretty much the same, and the other things are pretty much the same. So you got three to choose from. The GSM A1429 is the unlocked model, I guess you could say, that's probably going to be offered in various parts of Europe, et cetera. And of course the other global markets that support LTE.
Yeah, this is the first time in a really long time that I was tempted to switch to Verizon just for the global roaming, but I realized I don't actually globally roam all that often, so I decided to take a risk on staying with AT&T.
So here's the thing. You'll still be able to globally roam with the AT&T model. You just won't be able to do it on LTE. So if you had gone with the Verizon model, you could roam LTE on the when EE launches its LTE network, you'll be able to roam on there, and you can roam on the I think it's T-Mobile's running the LTE network in Germany. But you won't be able to do that with the LTE model or with the AT&T model. But you will be able to roam on HSPA Plus with the AT&T model. So
I'm sure that it killed Apple to have to roll multiple physical hardware devices for this launch, because they went from 2 iPhone 4s down to 1 for the 4S, and I think that was a very purposeful move for them. And the LTE, the completely disjoint, horrible mess of a global LTE band structure has destroyed any hope in the near term of launching a global device with a single set of SKUs. So until RF engineers do some amazing things that they obviously haven't done yet.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I think this we saw it with the iPad, the new iPad, how there was separate models for AT&T and Verizon LTE, but I think it just the iPhone 5 really just speaks to the mess of the LTE bands that are global and are worldwide, and how not interoperable they are.
Right.
Running down some of the other specs, the camera, what's different? It's still an 8-megapixel camera. I guess they've got a sapphire thing, so it's less likely to get scratched. But they didn't really talk up, other than the panorama mode, they didn't really talk up the camera a whole lot. And that panorama mode thing, I hope it's way better than what the third-party apps are that are out there. Because if it's basically the same thing that you could have done before, don't get me wrong, the camera on the iPhone 4S is best of class. I think it only wasn't until the 1X and the Galaxy S3 that any other phone even came close. So it's not like they needed to sprint ahead there. But it's not if you're not going to want to upgrade to the 5 just for the camera.
Right. Yeah, I think that all of these guys, Apple included, are running up against some physical limits over what they can do with cameras with the optic, the size of the optics that they're using, and that's something that you're seeing devices like the 808 overcome by just including massive optics, which isn't really isn't Apple's bag, and I don't think that you're going to see them do that in the future.
Right. Yeah. I mean, at this point, until the same thing with LTE, until engineers create this, crazy breakthrough that, defies the laws of physics as we know them right now, there is kind of this diminishing returns that we get with these with the phone cameras. Now, as far as the differences between the 4S and the 5 camera, that sapphire crystal makes it a little bit smaller, so that leads to the thinner design, which I think we're going to speak to in a minute. But it's also, the camera's a bit faster, and I think that's leaning on the new processor. So the shot-to-shot time is faster. The focusing, all that fun stuff should be faster. And I hope that the panoramic thing is I expect it to be pretty simple and pretty easy. But yeah, like you said, Dieter, I hope it's better than the third-party apps.
Yeah. Okay, so you brought up the thinness. I mean, it's thinner, right? It's 7.6 millimeters. Apple kept saying it's the thinnest smartphone on the planet, which is not true, right? Isn't there like an Arrows phone in Japan that's this thin?
Yeah, there's been some
Yeah.
like Sharp models that are like under 7 millimeters.
Yeah.
Yep. And there's that Oppo, and then depending on how you measure it, of course, the Droid Razr is 7.1, but it has the hump at the top.
Right. So it doesn't count. I'm just saying that flat out. It doesn't count. I don't know. I'm excited for it to be thinner. It's weird. I never thought of the iPhone 4 and the 4S as being like a chunk. I guess the other thing. Go ahead.
I am not excited for it to be thinner. I'm going to let you finish.
Really?
But let me just say that what they should have done is kept it the same. They should have pulled the Razr Max trick. They should have kept it the
You want an
exact same
iPhone
thickness.
Max?
No, I don't want an iPhone Max. I want there to be one model, and I want them to say it's the same thickness as the 4S. We didn't have to make it any thicker, but oh, by the way, you now have 2 frickin' days of battery life. That's more impressive than saying it's 7.6 millimeters or whatever.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see what the battery life is going to be, because when they were talking about battery life specs, they basically, I think they only pointed out standby time, but everything else was basically the same. And I mean, I have problems with battery life on the LTE phones I've been using so far. Like it's a real struggle to get a full day. And if with this new form factor and the new dock connector, which we got to get to, if I can't get a full day out of this thing, it's going to really suck to be constantly looking for a charger for the iPhone.
Right.
Also, I would love to see Apple release something with 2 X's in it, the iPhone Max. Like that would be life changing.
Would be life changing. But I mean, seriously, like, that's a trade off that I'm definitely willing to make, and I'm really fearful that all OEMs, Apple included, are still playing this pissing contest where they're trying to make the phones thinner and thinner and thinner, with blatant disregard for the fact that a phone that can make it from, say, 7 in the morning until 5 or 6 p.m. is not full day battery life, and it is not acceptable. I would say that at least once a week, possibly twice, on any phone that I use, really. Right now I'm on the Galaxy Nexus, but any phone, I'm in a situation where I'm out and my phone dies and there's nothing I can do about it.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with you, Chris. I think when the iPhone 4 design came out a couple of years ago, it was kind of like mind-blowing thin at the time. And I've never, in the 2 years since then, or almost 2.5 years since then, I've never felt like that design was thick or cumbersome or unwieldy or anything like that. So if they could have kept that same millimeter and added however much battery capacity that would afford, that would have been pretty great. Now, the other side of this...
Okay, so if they had added that battery capacity, it would have added a ton of weight, right?
So,
I mean, this thing weighs, what is it?
So it's lighter.
112 grams.
Yeah, so it's significantly lighter. I think the iPhone 4S was like 141 grams. So if they had just kept it the same weight, I would have been thrilled. The iPhone 4S doesn't feel like a heavy phone. It's not like 200 grams. So I would have much rather had the extended battery life, and then I won't be using a silly like external battery case that I end up doing from time to time with my 4S because the battery doesn't get me through the day.
Yeah.
I do want to give Apple credit for bringing back the aluminum back. I think that looks awesome, and I'm not sad to see the glass back go. I was never happy when they switched to plastic, and then moving to glass was a nice fix. But I feel like their original vision with the original iPhone was aluminum. Now they've finally gotten back to that. I'm pretty excited about that. I hope it feels good. Like that's one of my problems with the HTC One S. Like it's got that sweet micro arc oxidized aluminum thing, but I don't like the way it feels because it feels like a chalkboard. So I just hope this feels like just straight up good aluminum.
Well, there is one problem with the aluminum on the original iPhone, and maybe they've kind of gotten around it with this one. We don't know yet, but with the original iPhone, you still see it occasionally today. If every once in a while you see someone that's using an original iPhone for God only knows what reason. But they're scratched to hell and they're dented. They're physically dented, which is a phenomenon that's unique in the phone world because 99% of phones are plastic, which doesn't dent.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you still see that on like the iPod Touch, the most up to the new ones that were just announced, but the other iPod Touches from last year, et cetera, they get scratched extremely quickly, and you frequently see them dented too. So
Yeah.
be interesting to see if Apple solved that.
Nano SIM, whatever. It's a little tiny SIM. I've already ordered adapters. I'm sure it's going to be the worst.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask you about that. You took the plunge. Are you fearful for what your experience is going to be like with that adapter on Friday?
I am. I think it was CNET Asia put up a story where they took a micro SIM and like shaved it down to what they think the size of the nano SIM is, and it still worked, and they were able to get it to continue to work on a HTC One X, and so I'm assuming it'll be okay. I hope it will. I still want to be able to switch phones. It's one of the main reasons I stuck with AT&T. But if it's not, I mean, there's worse things in the world than being stuck on an iPhone 5.
Yeah, I've always had problems with. I mean, the problem with these adapters is that there's no way to lock a SIM into the adapter, right? So, like, I use an adapter on a micro SIM in the Galaxy Nexus, for instance, and it's a slide-in tray type, and when you're pulling it back out, what happens sometimes is the micro SIM will kind of start to fall below the adapter a little bit, and then it'll catch on either a pin or the indentation where the actual contacts are, and then it gets stuck, and then you're sitting there trying to pull down, and it takes 10 minutes. And I'm assuming those kinds of problems are only going to get worse with the nano SIMs because it's a physically smaller thing. You basically need carny hands to deal with these things. So we'll see. I'm hopeful that this is going to be manageable, but I suspect you're going to hear a lot of horror stories over the next few weeks of people trimming their micro SIMs or their standard SIMs down to nano SIM size and breaking the SIM or doing something to the contacts where it shorts them, or because you're if I'm not mistaken, you're physically cutting into the contact pad in order to get it down to nano SIM size.
Oh, I am not cutting down a SIM. That's crazy.
No, you aren't.
I'm just
right.
I'm going to activate the phone, and then hopefully I'll be able to put it in an adapter and size up from there. I would.
Right.
I have zero desire to tell anybody that it's a good idea to try and file down a SIM to nano SIM size. I think that is a recipe for pain.
Yeah. Especially since you with the iPhone 5, it's going to have the tray. You're going to have to get it to match in that tray perfectly. And like Chris was saying, the contacts footprint on a micro SIM is like the whole size of the nano SIM itself. So you're definitely cutting it close, I guess you could say, with the contacts.
Wah,
wah. Wah, wah,
wah.
Okay, we got to talk about what's left for hardware. The Lightning dock connector. All new connector. It works, it's reversible. It's all digital. And so that's why the adapter to the old dock adapter is so expensive, because they actually have to have a digital to audio converter in there. The feature that you lose is some of these iPod out features, which, to be clear, is just like mirroring display on like a BMW car or something, but it'll still work with audio docks with this big giant adapter. And look, why does Apple think it's too good for USB?
I don't know, and it drives me absolutely nuts. Like, I mean, people complain about the micro USB connector, but really, it's not a bad connector. It's hard to damage. It's ubiquitous. It's pretty straightforward to use. Like, you have to really be trying too hard in order to put it in upside down.
I'll tell you exactly what Apple's problem is with micro USB. It's the fact that made for iPod is and made for iPhone is an extraordinarily lucrative seal of approval for Apple, that it charges accessory makers extraordinary amounts of money to use. And if they switch to micro USB, that only incentivizes companies to skirt the made for made for iPhone seal and go rogue. And as it stands, these companies are going to have to license the Lightning port, the connector, which is that all adds up to dollar signs for Apple. That's exactly what's going on.
It's still.
They're going to have new features that are capable, that unless you do something crazy to extend the micro USB standard, like, audio out and video out, and I mean, whatever else, I suppose. But, whatever. I don't know. I'm pretty bitter about this. I just, it's like there's Apple exceptionalism for making money. And if you can make the case that this connector is better for consumers, I haven't seen it. This does not seem like it's better for consumers than just going to micro USB.
Right. I mean, I think you could have made that argument with the 30-pin connector 9 years ago because micro USB wasn't around. Mini USB might not have even really been around all that much. So there wasn't a lot of great connectivity options, and that kind of gave a standard connector that did a whole heck of a lot for the iPod at the time. But today, it's a different story. And they're making a connector that, to the layperson, looks like a micro USB connector. I think the average person will look at the port on an iPhone 5 and be like, oh, it's the same plug as my Galaxy S3 or whatever it is, just because it looks almost the same. It's almost the same size physically. So, it's a little, I mean, Chris has probably nailed it right on the head for the reason why, but it's just, like you said, Dieter, not exactly consumer friendly.
Now, I wonder how many stories you're going to hear of iPhone 5 owners coming into Genius bars with micro USB cables jammed into the Lightning port.
Tell me that it's got to be just a little bit bigger than the micro USB plug, so it just won't cram in there. It'll just fall out.
You would hope. You would hope.
They're at least that smart. I don't know. And are they selling the micro USB to 9-pin dock connector adapter in the US, or is it still only the UK?
I believe it's only the UK. I haven't heard that it's in the US.
That just pisses me off too, because
the only reason they're selling it in the UK or in the EU is to meet with regulations that require the compatibility. Right. And that doesn't exist here in the US, so Apple's not offering it. So, yeah.
And I mean, those regulations are good. They should have, bowed anyway. But the other thing is, I ordered
to be clear, they aren't.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, to be clear, they aren't laws. They are a number of OEMs agreed to these principles several years ago, and Apple is just adhering to them. But I don't think that there are any actual EU laws that would prevent them from selling the iPhone in EU countries if they weren't adhering to them. I think that they're doing it voluntarily. I don't know why, because they're really half-assing it. But
so the other thing that really bothers me with Lightning, and we were kind of talking about this in our chat room yesterday, is the fact that it doesn't support USB 3.0 out of the box. It supports USB 2.0, even though all of Apple's 2012 laptops have USB 3.0 ports. Plenty of Windows laptops have USB 3.0 ports, and USB 3.0 is fully backwards compatible with USB 2.0. So if Apple's forcing us to use a cable to do a lot of heavy syncing and interface with iTunes, why can't it be USB 3.0?
That's a good point.
It drives me nuts.
There's no good answer to that question. Not one that I'm happy with. So Sean Hollister put up a really good report about the new connector and what it means for accessory makers and just accessories in general. And my personal complaint is I ordered an extra cable and it's not ready to ship right away. So I'm going to be down to just one cable to charge my phone. And I'm not comfortable with that. I carry literally 4 micro USB cables in my bag all the time because I know I'm going to lose them.
Dieter,
so I'm really nervous.
Dieter, this is very easy. Just buy 2 iPhone 5s, take the cable out of one, and put the phone away.
But no, this article made a really good point. The big accessory makers, they're excited about this, right? As long as Apple lets them make new accessories, they get to crank out new accessories and sell more stuff, and that's really exciting. But it's a problem for this trend of smaller companies and guys launching products on Kickstarter, where they had gone through this whole plan with the original dock connector, and now they just don't have the resources to go back from scratch quickly and easily. But the Belkins of the world, they're super pumped about this. They're going to be able to sell you all new stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It is interesting though, if you go in and read Sean's report, it's interesting to hear basically all the big guys, Jawbone, Belkin, and there was another one, Logitech maybe, that he talked to, and all of them sort of hinted at the fact that the dock connectors days are numbered. Like eventually everything is just going to be wireless, whether you like it or not. And so I mean, yes, they do in the short term, they do get to profit by turning around all these new dock devices with Lightning connectors, but then in the long term, they think that it's just all going to be, this wireless ecosystem. Of course, you'll still need one of the advantages of these dock devices is that they charge your phone while you're playing music or whatnot, and you'll lose that advantage once you go completely wireless. But maybe by then we'll have wireless charging too, like over the air wireless charging, which has long been a dream of the industry.
How horrendously ugly and bulky are the first generation of battery packs going to be for this thing? You remember, like in the early days of the iPhone battery packs, they were super thick on the bottom because people hadn't figured out how to like minimize the amount of extra plastic they had to have next to the dock connector. Like they're gonna have to start that whole process over again. They're gonna have to leave space for the headphone jack in addition to the microphone and the speakers. I mean, they're just gonna be the worst. They're gonna be terrible.
Yep. Oh yeah.
And I mean, not to belabor this because I'm not really surprised, but Apple chose not to go with wireless charging, and they also chose not to put NFC on there. And it's funny, like I don't know what the wireless charging because I do find that really convenient, but the NFC thing, I'm kind of on their side. I feel like if it's not there, it's not there, and Apple's not going to try and force it, and I'm totally okay with that decision.
I'm going to challenge you on the wireless charging thing because wireless charging, to me, is one of those features that sounds really cool and you really think that you want it. But then once you have it, you're like, well, it only works on this one pad, which I would be running a micro USB cable to anyway. So what is actually the advantage of having it?
So I have a rebuttal to
3
that.
seconds of my life every day when I just go and set my phone down on the charger instead of reaching for a cable and plugging it in.
So I have
the convenience of getting in my car and just setting it on, well, at least with the, WebOS days, the magnetic charger, you just set it on your dash and you're done. Like it sounds really stupid, but it is really convenient. It's really nice.
It's not,
and if they had enabled wireless charging, then and they had stuck to, the Qi standard like Nokia did, then I wouldn't be looking at this hellstorm of having only one cable for the next however long and losing it and not being able to charge my phone at all. I'd at least be able to use the wireless charging.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think you brought up all the points that I had intended to say. Just because I remember with my, my Pre, I had I stuck one of the touchstone things to the dash of my car at the time, and I just would like get in my car and plop my Pre right on there, and it was like the most convenient thing ever. And if like a notification came in, I could see it quickly and easily, and it was charging up. It was fantastic. I don't think wireless charging is the answer for everything, because if you want to use your phone while it's charging, it's really inconvenient while it's sitting on a wireless charging dock, but just having the option there would be nice.
Also, does anyone know what the maximum current is for Qi?
Ooh, that I don't know. And that's actually one of the things I'm curious about what the current's going to be on this connector. If it'll be 2.1 or whatever, the different amperages are.
Yeah, the problem, I have this problem with basically every modern smartphone now where the phone just in an idle state, or certainly when you're using it, is drawing enough power so that plugging it into a micro USB cable just barely keeps up with it. Like it doesn't really charge, it just keeps the battery level stable.
Right.
Or maybe it very,
or
very
if you're tethering, you're just watching it slowly die.
Or if you're using GPS services in your car and it just can't keep up with it. Yep.
Right. And that problem's only going to get worse. And we've heard, in fact, I think we talked about it on the show before, that there is an addendum to the USB 3 specification that increases the maximum current, but that's still, I don't even think it's approved yet. So.
I don't have anything else to say about the hardware now that I've gotten my little rants out. Despite everything I've complained about with this connector, I still am actually pretty excited for the hardware. I think it's going to be impressive, and I'm going to feel really good with it in my pocket. And I'm even excited about the what's the phrase? The chamfered edges, the bezels that they made that angled instead of straight across. I think that'll feel nicer too.
The sandwich look is gone, so it's a smoother look, I guess you could say.
So we talked a little bit about AT&T and Verizon, but Chris, you put together a report about, our LTE network's going to suddenly start sucking now that we're going to have all these iPhones on them. And tell us, did I screw up by staying with AT&T?
Well, we'll find out, right? There's only one way to know for sure, and that's to see what happens over the course of the next few weeks. Yeah, so I mean, I think I've talked about it before. I've noticed that that AT&T's network has gotten noticeably slower since the Galaxy S3 launched, and I don't think it's any coincidence that I see Galaxy S3s on the street nonstop. I think that it's been an enormously successful phone for AT&T and Verizon and all the carriers that it's launched on. So you take that level of success, multiply it by 2 or 3 or 4, and do it all over again, and that begs the obvious question: are the LTE networks going to be able to survive in their current configurations? We talked to an AT&T spokesman about it, and he emphasized the fact that they've learned lessons since the HSPA days, and they're implementing new technologies like small cells and self-optimizing networks that kind of account for that sort of heavy usage. But at the end of the day, your physical limit, your ultimate limit, is the fact that you have a certain amount of spectrum available. And if you run out of spectrum, and if everybody's trying to tweet at the same time, you're going to run into problems. So we just
really
don't.
Tweeting
I'm
is
sure
going to be the problem.
Tweeting will bring
FaceTime will
LTE
sure.
networks to their knees.
Well, my point remains the same, though. I mean,
Actually,
we'll have to see.
The new Twitter app is really inefficient. It's not just limited to 140 characters. Every single one of those characters is a megabyte, and so when you send a tweet out, it takes up a huge chunk.
Every character is an emoji icon, and
yeah, I would not doubt it. The way Twitter is going. So yeah, I mean, we'll have to see what happens. But if it does bring the networks to their knees, that is a very, very damning conclusion and a damning statement about the state of wireless in the U.S. So we have to hope. We all have to collectively hope that these networks stay operational and that they're fast enough to actually use.
So, Chris, I got to ask you, which of the networks do you think is going to be the least hit by the iPhone? I have my own theory.
Oh, I know the answer. I know the answer. I got it. In the U.S., you want to know what the answer is?
Sprint.
T-Mobile.
Sprint.
T-Mobile.
T-Mobile. Yeah. I mean, you have to look at to answer that question. You need to look at what carriers are shouting from the highest hilltops that they're still offering unlimited data. And the reason they're doing that is because their networks are underutilized and over-engineered. And so, yeah, those are T-Mobile and Sprint. That also means, of course, that if those networks rapidly load up for whatever reason, then they're probably at greater risk of ultimate failure. That's just, and I'm not saying that out of any knowledge that I have. I just have to assume that would be the case. So, but yeah, I do agree. It's going to be either T-Mobile or Sprint that's at in the best position. Also, that question is you have to take it on a market by market basis. I'll give you a prime example. AT&T only has 5 megahertz up and down for its LTE network in Chicago, whereas in most markets it has 10 by 10. So Chicago is more likely to have major LTE problems on AT&T brought about by the launch of the iPhone 5 than, say, Dallas.
Chris, we need to move you to like Atlanta or Memphis or Seattle, any other city other than Chicago, because you and the depth of knowledge that you have about AT&T's network failures in Chicago are second to none. And we really need to spread that knowledge around. We need to embed you in other cities so that you can complain about their wireless just like you do about Chicago.
Well, Seattle, Seattle still does not have AT&T LTE. They're supposed to launch soon, but I think that they are. If you look at the major cities in the U.S. that haven't launched with AT&T LTE yet, Seattle is probably the biggest at this point. And I do get complaints almost weekly from people saying, "Why the heck don't we have LTE yet?" And it's a great question because AT&T has a big smartphone office in Seattle. Of course, Microsoft is there. You would just think that it would behoove AT&T to launch LTE there as quickly as possible.
Right.
Well, okay, we gotta start talking about other stuff, and by other stuff, I mean other iPhone stuff. Let's talk about iOS 6. I guess, I mean, there's a bunch of little things, but they showed off everything, and it was all the same stuff that we'd seen before. I mean, genuinely, the only new feature that we hadn't already seen from WWDC that I can think of is that it has, a different aspect ratio. Um, and we have another great report from Ellis, right? Yeah, about what app developers think. And what kills me about this, okay, they're going to letterbox apps. That's fine. But most of the developers that he spoke to were like, yeah, we figured this was coming, and it's not like the end of the world. And what it blows my mind is we have spent the past 5 years hearing this cudgel about fragmentation based on screen size and what a huge problem it is for Android developers to have to target all these different screen sizes. And my feeling has always been that the screen size difference wasn't the real problem here. It was other fragmentation issues. And sort of the fact that most of these developers have responded to this with kind of a collective shrug, like, it doesn't surprise me, and it shouldn't surprise anybody. It's just so funny that we've spent so much of our collective psychic angst about the screen size was wasted, when really, I think at the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal. That was a lot of preamble for me to say shrug, but there you go.
Well, so
Respond.
I have a few thoughts on this. First off, I think that the letterboxing is correct me if I'm wrong. I think that the apps appear in the middle. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, you're gonna get black bars on the top and bottom if you're holding it in portrait, or left and right if you're holding it landscape.
Yeah. So the app should appear at the bottom, not in the middle, and that's so that you're maintaining the relationship between the thumb of the user's dominant hand and the bottom of the application, and that is the most UI forward thing that I think I've ever said in my
If
life.
the software keyboard, like on a letterboxed app, if the software keyboard pops up above the letterbox and not from the bottom of the screen, like, that will drive me completely insane.
Yeah, that'll be pretty nuts.
Because, like, this is one of the things that really bothered me about the original implementation of Android 4 on the HTC One X with that big black menu bar. I mean, I wasn't that angry about losing those pixels, but what I was angry about was that the keyboard wouldn't be in the exact same spot on the screen every time you'd open it up. It sometimes would be up above the menu, and sometimes it'd be flush to the bottom of the screen. And so I really hope that when you pop open the keyboard on these letterboxed apps, that it'll be flush to the bottom of the screen.
Right, right. But I also think that Apple's expectation is that, and I think it's a very fair expectation, is that the developers of any apps that matter in the App Store are going to be updated to support the new resolution very quickly. In fact, the major guys have probably spent the past
we've already seen some updates, to be honest with you, that are saying iOS 6 and iPhone 5 compatible. I think Tweetbot just updated today, actually.
Right.
Yep. And that's just going to continue, and it's going to happen very fast. So you'll just have this, you'll have the long tail of apps that are abandonware and things that are sort of longer cycle apps that I'm sure will be a problem for the next year. But those aren't really Apple's concern. It's the major apps, and those are just going to get refreshed very, very fast.
Right.
So the rest of iOS 6, I mean, it's coming out on the 19th for other phones, which is tomorrow if you're listening to this live, or today if you're listening to it the day it's released, or last week if you're just catching up on Verge Mobile Show podcasts, which really, you should be listening to these the moment they're out. I mean, I don't know. So the story went around the day of the event, and I put up a piece the day after. There's this idea that iOS 6 is boring. And I mean, the truth is, it's a little boring, right? There's not anything here other than maps. Oh, which we got to talk about maps. Oh my God. That like is completely wildly different than iOS 5, right? And Apple always iterates small bits, OS to OS on these updates, but there's usually one big tentpole feature that you can be like, this is the thing that changes the way you use your phone. And the thing that changes the way you use your phone in iOS 6 is like an app. And as great as iOS is, and I think it's great, I really do. It's not like it's not a location OS. Like it does a better job of providing location services to third-party developers. But for most consumers, mapping and navigation is an app. It's not a core OS experience. And so, I mean, that's why, we went with this angle that, it's always 73 degrees and sunny on the iPhone's home screen, because like it hasn't changed, and that's okay for a lot of people. But on the other hand, like there's a sense of like forward moving innovation and thinking about the future of computing, that like Apple hasn't changed their vision for years and years on it. And, that seems a little bit, I don't know. I'm not like freaking out. I'm not troubled, but I don't know. I feel like I say it every year that like, man, next version, they got to really shake it up, because this is the same. And like, we're just saying it again with iOS 6, like we said with iOS 5.
Nilay said something very interesting the other day, and I think that I agree with him, which is that iOS 6 feels like Lion. It's sort of this weird hodgepodge of features that nobody necessarily asked for, and there is no single compelling, there's no must-have feature that sets it apart. And I do think, like looking at the holistic picture of the iPhone 5, I do think that the story is about the hardware on balance, not about iOS 6. And but to your point, Dieter, I think that we might be in for a long haul here. Like if you look at OS X, you go back over the past decade. How much has the platform really changed? Go back and look at screenshots from 10.0, 10.1. This might just be the UX that Apple has settled on, and they're going to continue to put Chrome on it until it's impossibly stale. And I don't even know if Apple has a game plan for OS X, much less iOS at this point.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to dump into like OS X 10.0 or whatever, you wouldn't feel terribly you wouldn't feel like you're in a different world, even if you've been using Mountain Lion for the past few months. Whereas,
right.
Other platforms, if you were to jump back 10 years, it definitely feels like a different operating system.
Right. And Windows 8 is the perfect example of that, right? Like Windows 8 is like a clean. Well, I mean, you still have the desktop mode, right? But if you look at the UX that Microsoft is pushing for Windows 8, it is a clean break from everything you know about Windows. And that's something that, I mean, Apple is eventually going to have to cross that very scary gap. And I think that I was saying this on Twitter the other day. I think the problem for companies like Apple and Nokia and RIM and Microsoft, they've all had this problem where at some point, even in the face of overwhelming success, they need to feel this invisible inflection point where they need to make a clean break and find the next big thing. And it becomes almost impossibly difficult to do that when you're experiencing this massive, overwhelming success like Apple is doing right now.
The way I put this is the faster you go, the harder it is to turn. And they're going really fast right now. They're selling a ton of phones.
Right. So I don't think any of us can reasonably say when that point is going to come for them. When do they need to make that clean break? I don't think anybody really knows. Are they planning for that clean break at this point? I don't think anybody knows. But yeah, in the meantime, they're selling just bucket loads of iPhones.
Yeah. Okay. So FaceTime works over 3G or 4G. That's great, except unless you're on AT&T and don't want to switch plans. Siri's got sports scores. Mail has this thing called VIP, where you can have emails from certain people give you different notifications. A feature that was introduced on Windows Mobile. You can reply to a text from a missed phone call. A feature that was introduced on Windows Mobile. I'm just saying, man. There's shared photo streams. That's like, I don't know, interesting, but it's like this weird, like not quite a social network kind of. I don't know. It's weird. The thing I'm working up to, like the big change, is Maps. Maps, all Apple. It's all new. They've kicked Google to the curb, and from everything that I've seen, like it looks very pretty, and it seems to run pretty well. And their flyover feature, it's not as useful to me as Street View, but it is pretty cool. And there is turn-by-turn navigation, which is really important. And you don't have to keep hunting for third-party apps that have weird subscription models and blah blah blah. The third-party navigation apps on iOS I've never been fond of at all, especially compared to Android. So you get all that, and all the third-party apps should still work fine, and everything should be great, unless you live in a city and you need to use public transit.
Right.
Yeah, that seems to be the big divide between iOS 6. We'll have to see how it plays out, or maps, I should say, in iOS 6. We'll have to see how it plays out. But like, there's a lot of features that say someone who lives in a rural or suburban area would really appreciate, like that turn-by-turn navigation that I think a lot of users have been wanting on iOS since Android introduced it a few years ago. But at the flip side, there's the urban user who might rely on those transit directions that are going to be no longer available directly, and you'll have to go to a third-party app option.
Yeah. This feels like a change that was driven solely on political and snap political decisions between Apple and Google, and not any desire to actually improve the user experience. Because I don't think there's anything. I mean, you can make some arguments about the flyover mode, but there is nothing with actual material benefit to the user in iOS 6 Maps. Not to say that that Apple's version of Google Maps was very good either, right? They had essentially Google Maps had essentially remained unchanged in iOS since the start. And Google Maps on Android has lapped that product several times over. So I think that if you're upgrading from iOS 5 to 6, that jump is probably less of a shock to the system than if you're moving from an Android device to iOS 6.
Unless you need transit directions.
Right. Unless you need transit directions.
Which I'm totally dependent on, by the way.
The other thing is that these new map features that are the headline features, Apple says won't be coming to the older devices. So if you are on an iPhone 4 or an older iPod Touch or an older iPad, you won't get the turn-by-turn navigation and you won't get the 3D flyover. So especially for iPhone 4 users, this really feels like they're losing features more than they're gaining anything. We'll have to see how the final product is, and once we run some tests on it and see how well it performs. But at least if you're an iPhone 4S or an iPhone 5 user, you gain that turn-by-turn feature. If you're losing the transit directions, you're gaining the turn-by-turn feature, so it can be kind of like a net zero. Whereas on the iPhone 4, you lose the transit directions and you don't gain the turn-by-turn feature.
Yeah. Right. Do you guys think that Google's going to go all out and release a new app for iOS, Maps app? I think they did a really good job with their YouTube app, and their Google Plus app is good. Like, they've figured out how to code decent native iOS apps.
Except for the Gmail app, yeah. Every other Google app is great, except for the Gmail app. So I have hope that they do release a Maps app, a Google Maps app, but I hope that the team that built the YouTube app and the Google Plus app work on it, and not the team that built the Gmail app.
See, I'm a big fan of conspiracy theories, and I really like the notion that Google goes out of its way to either A, make iOS apps crappy, or B, nerf them in some tragic way. And of course, to your point, Dan, the Gmail app is absolutely terrible. The Chrome app for iOS, of course, is still built on Safari. It's not actually using.
But the important Chrome features are there. You get the syncing, you get the Omnibox, you get the cool tab management. So that's like the only thing that's really different when you jump from iOS to Android in Chrome is the rendering engine behind it. Like the experience feels the same.
Google can't put the Chrome rendering engine on iOS.
They just can't. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, you're right. They can't. But the fact remains, I just allow me to have my fantasy world where I think that Google is trying to nerf iOS products.
Specifically Gmail.
Yeah. Well, which, I mean, theoretically, that's what they bought Sparrow for, but that remains to be seen. We don't know how that's going to play out yet.
Yeah. Hopefully it plays out fast.
Well, one of the other nerfed, if you will, if I can steal your term, Chris, iOS apps from Google recently was the Drive app, which was virtually useless when it came out because it was just a viewer and you couldn't create new files and you couldn't upload anything. But that recently got updated with the ability to create files and to upload files and stuff like that. So that got unnerfed, I guess. So hopefully, Google can do the same with the Gmail app, and hopefully, if Google does decide to release a Google Maps app, it's good from the beginning.
Yeah.
Are we done talking about the iPhone 5? That possible?
Well, we could talk about pricing.
Yeah. Okay. So the iPhone 4S is down to $99 on contract. The iPhone 4 is free, and the 3GS is finally at long last gone, which took forever.
Yeah, so I think
stuck around for so long.
Yeah, it did. Well, I mean, nowadays the iPhone 4 is the same age as the 3GS was when it was moved to the free price point. But I think we talked about this a little bit last week, and having an iPhone 4 class device at free is kind of a wild thing to think about. I mean, the iPhone 4 in 2010 was introduced a crazy display that we had not seen before, great hardware, obviously, and a really solid camera. And now you can get that for free on contract. And if you compare it to the other phones that are available for free on contract, it's like not even a contest.
Yeah.
Not even close.
Even though it's 2.5 years old, it's still not even a contest.
Right. No, Apple, I have to say, Apple has figured out how to create a range of products. And that's just to take its amazing, excellent old products and keep them on the market and continue to lower the prices. And I think that the brand strength of the iPhone name carries all these products more or less equally, so that you don't have these random names for the low-end products. It's a beautiful model, and it's obviously working extremely well for them. However, I do think that they would have been very well served, and the world would have been well served if they had continued to sell the 3GS as just a dirt cheap prepaid device, both in the U.S. and abroad. You imagine if you could get the 3GS for say $79 or $99 contract free, it would still be a great product even now as a prepaid phone.
Right, like that would be the go-to unlocked roaming phone to bring with you if you travel to Europe or whatever.
Right.
Well, the march of progress continues. The iPhone is coming on Friday, but tomorrow, the 19th, day after tomorrow, tomorrow, there's going to be an HTC event. We're expecting Windows Phone 8 devices, I think, from them. There's the Zenith, the Accord, and the Rio. There's also been this 5-inch Android phone that's been floating around. And I mean, we've talked about this a lot, that the 1 Series and the 1X in particular hasn't helped revitalize HTC much. And so I'm hoping that whatever they're bringing to the table here will be awesome, first of all, but will get serious support from carriers or partners, either Google or Microsoft, depending on what it is they're announcing. Because I would hate to see HTC just, fade into, irrelevance. I don't think that they deserve that as a company.
Yeah. We've seen a few leaks from this supposed Windows Phone lineup from HTC, and they it's hard to get a sense. It's really hard to get a sense without actually seeing the devices in person and being at the event or whatnot to feel out how they actually compare to what Nokia has on offer for Windows Phone 8. And so I don't feel comfortable really making any sort of definitive comment on these things, but in general, I do feel more bullish. And again, I know I say this with every new release of Windows Phone, but I feel more bullish about the hardware and the software going into this release than ever before. It's just a question of whether they get the, like you said, Dieter. They need the carrier support. They need to get their story straight with updates and upgrades going forward. They just need to present. I mean, iPhone just keeps getting stronger and stronger. And if they want to compete in that end of the market, they just need to deliver an extremely powerful message going into the holiday season. So hopefully, I mean, I think that what the current rumors are tracking for an early November launch, right, for most of these Windows Phone 8 devices, including the 920.
Yeah.
I don't know. So we've held. I think that all three of us have held the 920, and it is a very beefy and heavy phone. That I think is already a strike against it for anyone who's considering. If you walk into say an AT&T store and you want to compare a 920 to an iPhone 5, that's already a pretty powerful strike against it. But it does have the color range going for it, and I think that the Windows Phone 8 home screen just looks really cool. I like the fact that you've got these multiple box sizes going on now. I mean, we'll see. I'm definitely going to, there's no question about it, that I'm going to own and use a Windows Phone 8 device of some sort for some period of time. I don't know if that's going to be one of these HTCs or a 920 or what. But I said that with the 900, and I did. I used it for several weeks, and like I said before, the Achilles heel, what ultimately killed it for me, was the lack of any sort of reasonable Gmail support. So we'll see if I mean, seriously, all Google needs to do is enable its iOS web view on mobile IE10. That is all they need to do, and my prayers will be answered. So we'll see if they can pull that off, or if Google feels the need to pull that off.
I don't know. That's a pretty janky fix, if you ask me, because you still have to go to the web view to deal with your email.
You do, yeah. So you don't get proper notifications, but you kind of do, because so here's what I always do on iOS, this was before the Sparrow days, but what I would do is I'd set I'd set up an Exchange account pointing to my Gmail, so I'd still get notifications, and then I would replace mail in the fixed bar of icons at the bottom with a web icon pointing to the mobile Gmail view, so that and between the two I kind of made it work. And that's what if theoretically if mobile Gmail worked properly on Windows Phone, that's what I would do on Windows Phone. But you get the web view, which is completely worthless. So we either need something that is the equivalent of Sparrow for Windows Phone, or we need Google to fix the very least, the minimum effort fix is for Google to fix the web view. But we need something, because the mail client, I mean, I get that it's great for like pop email or whatever. It does not work well when you have something as rich and advanced as Gmail is, especially if you actually put the time and effort into organizing it the way that you can do if you take advantage of all the features. I use priority inbox, I use labels up the wazoo, and it's completely unmanageable with a standard email client.
Yeah, I agree. There's the standard email client looks really great, and it's fun to use. At least on Windows 7.5 it was, and it was very fast, but it really lacked the robust Gmail support that you'd be looking for.
Yeah.
So I think the last thing I want to talk about today is this insane thing that happened with Acer. They were going to launch a phone based on the Aliyun OS. Am I even pronouncing that right? And so they had like reporters going to this event, and they just canceled it. And they're like, Google says we can't do this, so we're not going to do it. And it's like, what the heck happened? And so then Google comes out and says, yeah, no, we said they can't do it. They can't launch this phone because it's based on Android. And then the guys behind Aliyun were like, no, it's not based on Android. And there's been this back and forth between Andy Rubin and the guys behind this Aliyun OS about whether or not it's a fork of Android, and whether or not Acer is allowed to launch a phone based on it. And if they do, that Google would, kick them out and stop giving them support, of like Google Apps, and kick them out of the Open Handset Alliance. It's a really weird story.
Yeah. So I think the damning, I think that the nail in the coffin of Acer's story here was when Rubin, I think it was Rubin, who pointed out that Aliyun's App Store has pirated versions of Google apps in it, Google Android apps. So I mean, like, come on, like, what's your defense at that point? I mean, theoretically, I guess you could build a platform that is binary compatible with Android, but first of all, odds are you didn't. And second of all, that doesn't change the fact that you have these pirated apps chilling in your app store. So,
right, yeah. So I mean, the story from Aliyun is that they built this thing that they're not using the Dalvik engine, which is the engine that runs a bunch of Android apps. They're using their own custom thing that like mirrors its functionality, which is ironic because Dalvik's whole point was to do the same thing to Java, right?
yeah.
Anyway, so Google's saying no, that's not true. You're actually using our technology, somewhere in here. This is technically a fork. And as a member of the Open Handset Alliance, Acer has agreed not to launch stuff that is based on Android but not Android compatible. What's funny about that is Amazon's totally free to do that. It's just not part of the Open Handset Alliance. So there's been a lot of jokes running around about, so ha ha ha, Google's not so open anymore, ha ha ha. And I don't know how I feel about that. Like, part of me wants to, like, I don't know, be sympathetic to this, hating on Google for being evil about this and limiting one of their partners and telling them what they can and can't do. But on the other hand, like, I guess I'm kind of happy to see the Open Handset Alliance finally actually mean something, because to date it seemed to me like it was just this PR shell, and it didn't actually like have any teeth, or there wasn't actually any real contributions from the other members. But this, and even like Sony putting its stuff into this experimental project to launch AOSP stock Android on Sony's handsets recently, like, it's starting to feel a little bit more like an ecosystem and a little bit less like just Google's bag, which is a totally ironic thing to say after Google just, swung the hammer at Acer.
Well, I have a different view. I think that, this hammer that Google swung is something that people have been wanting Google to do for a long time. I think it went, the way it happened was not how everybody wanted it to happen, but people have been complaining about how, you pick up one Android device and it doesn't feel like another Android device, and you move to another Android device and it's a totally different experience. And I know a lot of people just wanted Google to put its foot down and say, like, you can conform to these standards or you don't get Gmail. And that's kind of like what happened here. Google said that Aliyun is not, or Acer is not, conforming to our standards with the Open Handset Alliance with this Aliyun OS. And, if you can do that, but you're not going to get the open handset privileges. And I think that a lot of people have been asking for Google to do that, but it just kind of went about the wrong way here.
So let's be clear. I think that 2 years ago, there's no way that Google would have done this. They wouldn't have cared. But I think that what Amazon did to Android is something that Google never anticipated, and I think that they are more anxious than ever to keep the spirit of Android close. And we're seeing that bear out with this. I think that you put this exact story 2 years ago. Not Rubin, not anybody else inside Google would have cared that this was happening. But it's a different Google now, and they have different priorities and a different understanding for what they need to do to advance the platform in light of how successful Amazon was at forking Android in a meaningful way, and went on to build successful products on top of it. I don't think that Rubin ever anticipated that happening with Android.
Yeah, well, the other thing about this that rubs people the wrong way, and I think rightly so, is that it was Acer. I mean, it feels like picking on the little guy. If Samsung had gotten to the point where they were launching an OS that claimed to have Android compatibility, do you really think that Google would have done this to Samsung?
The answer is true. Yeah, that's true.
But I mean, it's also like, I'm sure that there just wasn't proper communication between Acer and Google in the first place, right? Earlier on in this process.
Right.
But I take your point about Amazon and what it's done with the Kindle Fire. I think Google is finally drawn a line of, this is where, Android compatibility has to be. And the question now is, are they going to move that line to try and create more consistency across different manufacturers, or is this where this line is going to stay?
Right. I mean, we know there's still that Wall Street Journal rumor from several months ago hanging over our heads that we haven't heard a peep about ever since, about there being a line of Nexus phones supposedly announced right about now. I'm expecting this to happen anytime now if the rumor actually comes to fruition. So, if Google wants to expand the meaning of Nexus into something that's truly useful to consumers, then that gives them more leeway to kind of ignore the rest of the noise. But if they don't do that, if they continue with the existing Nexus model, which isn't very commercially successful in any meaningful way, then then they might need to say, okay, well, we need to rein in all of our OEMs and sort of create more consistency across the entire Android range, which might actually be the more desirable. As much as I would like to have a selection of Nexus phones to choose from that are true Nexus devices, at the end of the day, it might be more meaningful for for Google to put more, to exert more control over their main OEM partners.
That's actually not a bad note to end on. Now that the iPhone rumors have wrapped up and we actually know what the iPhone 5 looks like definitively, it's time for us to get some sweet brand new Nexus action, whether it's these multiple devices or just a brand new Nexus device from whoever it's going to be. There is still no option of me to get stock Nexus, stock Android on AT&T with LTE without hacking. And I'm tired of that. I'm tired of that situation. I'm tired of the flagship Android Nexus phone being on boring, crappy hardware with a terrible screen and an even worse camera. I'm ready for a really good Nexus phone.
Yeah, and it's I mean, the Galaxy Nexus wasn't the most cutting edge phone when it was released, and at this point it's pretty long in the tooth.
Yeah. Well, everybody, thank you so much for watching the Verge Mobile Show. If you want to follow us, you can comment on this post when it goes up. You can follow us on Twitter as well. We are all at Verge. I am at Backlon. Dan is at DC Seifert. Chris is at ZPower. Vlad, who you will hopefully see next week, is at Vlad Savov. And like I just said, we'll be back next week. So tune in then. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.